Hello and welcome to this edition of Talk of the Trinity podcast. I'm Baz Barrett. With me is not Will Forrest. He is otherwise engaged, but he is still manning the Twitter page at Talk Trinity and our YouTube page at Talk Trinity. So he is there somewhere and he will be ready to engage with you with all things Villa. But without Will, needs somebody to step up to share the screen if you're watching this on YouTube, or the airwaves if you're listening audio via our podcast channels. And delighted to be joined by a return visitor in terms of Pete from at Talking Toffees. Great to have you back. Cheers for coming on. I appreciate it's been a difficult week in terms of Everton, following Everton. So appreciate you taking the time to come back on. There's been you were back previously on in September, just before the first game at Villa Park. Fair to say a lot's changed since then.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Baz. It's a pleasure. Absolutely. The season, the wheels have completely came off. When we spoke, we touched on there before we came on air. When we spoke at that time, we were quietly confident, even with Benitez. We got off to a good start, and we were going to Villa Park, confident of taking all the points and looking at potentially Europa League football. And at this moment in time, to put in context of where we are, only 2 hours ago, I knew who was going to be managing Everton for the game on Saturday. So, yeah, it's a complete shambles from top to bottom with Everton right now. And as I say, from a Villa point of view, I'm sure you guys are probably rubbing your hands at coming to Goodson. Although, as you touched on before we came on, Baz, with having Duncan Ferguson from an Everton point of view, the hope is that it might give everybody a lift, having a cult hero, some would say a legend in the dugout. And I think for our players, if we can't play for him, then I don't think it matters who comes in. We won't play for anyone.
No. So yeah, I don't think the fans are going to be too appreciative of players who don't get themselves up for big dunk when he's in charge. And sliding doors moment, that game in September, because from recollection, Everton didn't play too bad in the first half. And one player who Villa fans really keen to see on the field, and he's largely been injured for most of the season. And he got injured in this game as well, but only after a 20-minute spell, which pretty much tore through Everton on that day, Leon Bailey. And yeah, as we said, the season has not gone particularly well for Everton since then, unfortunately. But yeah, that sliding doors, I mean, a player who, as I said, we've been really excited to see him at Villa, but just not fit. And he just held himself together with the sticky back plastic long enough to send Everton's season into freefall from that point, unfortunately. But
that sounds about right, Baz, to be honest. Funny enough, in that game, I agree. I thought Everton played well, and I think Damari Gray missed a good chance just before it went to 1-0. And I know we will get on to him later on, so I don't want to preempt it, but Luca Dean on that day was probably suspect for a couple of the goals. But yeah, it hasn't got any better since then, unfortunately.
No, I mean, you've mentioned him. We'll go straight into Luca Dean. I think he got on the score sheet that day. And unfortunately, at the wrong end. I mean, from a Villa fan perspective, not knowing too much about what we may call the political situation at Everton near the end of Dinier's reign, he was a player who generally the fans at Villa very pleased to get. I think in terms of Villa needed a left back. I mean, we had Matt Targett as first choice and not a lot behind in terms of depth. So especially in terms of the January transfer window, you don't tend to get too many international fullbacks available, especially from a fellow Premier League club and who are willing to sell. It looked like that in terms of, you're about to fill us in terms of the detail, Luca Digne fell out with Benitez. The board then backed Benitez in terms of getting rid of who he deemed a bad influence in the club. I mean, we'll come on to Benitez a bit in a moment. So, board back it manager, then board sack manager a week later. So, in a 2+2 is maybe 4, maybe 5 scenario, whoever the next manager of Everton is, you wouldn't have thought would want to sell Lucadinha. So in terms of opportunistic timing, it was a pickpocket in terms of Villa, and he made his debut against Man United in the game just gone and played well. And, he did exactly what Villa fans expected him to do. You get up the field, an attacking threat, especially on the overlap. From the Everton fan perspective, what was the reaction when Digne was, in effect, pushed out the door? And especially in terms of what happened next, was there a universally negative reaction, or was there a feeling amongst Everton fans that maybe Benitez was right in terms of trying to get Digne out?
I don't think anybody thought Benitez was right in wanting him to go, but I don't think it was a universal reaction in him leaving. I mean, to give the Villa fans a little bit of context, with Benitez, he was in constant power struggles at the club. So before Lucadine, it was the director of football, Marcel Brands, and Marcel Brands left the club. Everton's medical team, there was a fallout and Benitez won, and Danny Donashi and others left the club. The head of recruitment left the club. So in effect, Benitez was winning every battle, and him and Lucadine clashed. And obviously, as fans, we're not privy to know what goes on behind the scenes, but Benitez come out on top. And I think you touched on it there, Baz. What is strange is you give Benitez all of this control, and we sell a key player, and then you sack him. Now, the only difference is I don't think the board ever backed Benitez. I think the owner, Mashiri, did. I don't think the board were keen on him, but I won't bore the Villa fans with the politics of Everton. But yeah, in essence, from the outside looking in, it did seem as though Benitez forced Lucadine out. For me personally, I'm quite neutral on the situation, because whether it was the case that Lucadine didn't want to play for Benitez, in extension, he didn't want to play for Everton. So for me, you play for the badge on the shirt, not a manager. That's secondary. So the fact Lucadine wanted to leave, I was happy to see him moved on. But a lot of fans did see a 2-2, and it was 4. They saw Benitez forcing a key player out, and they were all for Lucadine. I think some fans looked at it as a case, well, we signed them, I think, for about 20 million. We've got a few good years out of him. He's not far off 29, and we've been offered good money. It's probably a good deal. I think my reservation is that it's not a position or a player you'd want to be selling halfway through a season and replacing with a young, inexperienced lad from Kiev when you're potentially fighting relegation. That doesn't make sense. My opinion on Lucadine as a player, I'll probably go on to it in a moment, is I don't see it as a huge loss in the sense of what a player we've lost. But in the context of where we are right now, it seems to be an unnecessary sale, given, as you say, any manager coming in, I'm sure, would rather have Lucadine. And I think right now, we're no better off for selling him, given that the lad who's replaced him he's very raw, and he'll probably need at least 6 months to bed into the Premier League,
Yeah, I think in terms of defining value and kind of who wins and who loses from a transfer can be quite difficult in terms of, you mentioned there, Digne, the age. That was something in terms of our podcast I picked on, in terms of the Villa mantra for the last few years has been resale value, in terms of buying younger players, potentially, picking them on for a bit of profit later on, or if they want to stick around, being able to build a team that can stay together for a while longer. Gerrard's come in and has changed the policy. He wants to buy more experienced players. He described them as winners, a bit of experience, which is fine. So I think in terms of Digne, for a 29-year-old left back, do I think it's a bit high? If you're just looking at it in terms of age, yeah, I think it was. But in terms of, if you're looking at it in terms of 2-3 years, if Villa are in Europe and Digne's playing left back, then you're not going to worry too much about the fee. And I think it'll be similar for Everton in terms of mentioned there's going to be a transition period, bedding a new left back in. If he's still at Everton in 2-3 years, and you're also near or even achieving your aims of Europe, then you'll say we got nearly 30 million for a 29-year-old left back. So, I think both teams could win, both teams could lose based on this transfer.
I think that's it, Baz. I think both teams have done well out of it. I mean, from an Aston Villa point of view, I think it's an excellent signing. I really do. I think Gerrard's done brilliant because, as you touched on earlier, in January, your options are limited, and he's gone and got a Premier League proven international, so you don't need to worry about him bedding in. And you probably saw that against United up and down the line. I don't believe Aston Villa could have signed a better left back for the here and now. So I think it's an excellent signing. I think it's one of those deals from a financial point of view where both sides, it could be win-win. I think Villa needed to get the man because there was competition and he spent money. It's not obscene money. When you look at Chris Ward going from Burnley to Newcastle, Luca Dean is a higher caliber player. As an Evertonian watching him week in, week out, my only reservation, and it's quite a big reservation that Andy and I had on our podcast, is I think defensively he's average, but while I say that, I think going forward in terms of what he can add to Villa, I think there's not many better than him in terms of being able to link up with the winger, creativity, creating chances. You've got the likes of Watkins and Ings further up top, and obviously you've got Coutinho now. I think he'll fit in there. I think Villa will be much better for it. I mean, I say he's average defender. I think he's better than what you've had at left back. No disrespect to the other lads. So I don't think he's a poor defender. But he's probably your modern day fullback. A bit like across the park here, you've got Alexander-Arnold, who is a brilliant footballer, but actually defensively probably not the best. So that's how I would analyse him. I think Villa have got a good player there.
Yeah, but in terms of being average defensively, it fit right into our defence currently in terms of our goals conceded record this season anyway, at least. But mentioned Benitez no longer at Everton. It seemed from an outside perspective, looking in that, I think we mentioned when you were on earlier in the season, there's always the lazy conclusion drawn that as soon as somebody steps in to manage the club who managed somebody else who's a rival, shall we say, the fans never gave the manager a chance, always wanted them out. I mean, Villa, we had that when McLeish came in. The outside perspective was, you never backed him because he used to manage Birmingham City. Ultimately, if McLeish would have got us to the top of the league, we wouldn't have cared kind of where he came from, or if he would have built a team playing good football, or kind of see progress. You might get one or two who kind of never going to accept it anyway, but fan bases, you're never going to get 100% unanimous. So looking on the outside, Benitez, I think, evidently some eyebrows were raised based on his Liverpool experience. But if he would have got Everton into Europe or challenging for Europe, whilst there still would have been some objection, he wouldn't have been sacked. Let's put it that way. He's sacked because of a run in one, win in 15. What it does do, in terms of similar to McLeish, is when things begin to go wrong, the snowball effect comes quicker, and the fan reaction, the fan support changes a lot quicker in a negative fashion than perhaps what it would have done with somebody else. But I suppose, firstly, Benitez out the door, right decision from your part, and has the fan reaction been relief? I suppose, or has there been any dissent in terms of the decision to get rid of him, or has it been united the fan base?
It has. It's been universal, Baz. Everybody's on the same page. He needed to go. I don't think it's relief. I think most Evertonians are level-headed and level-minded enough to realise that the problems in Everton right now are bigger than Benitez. I think Benitez was part of a much bigger problem. And you're seeing that now at the moment with being linked with new managers every hour, from Graham Potter to Martinez to Rooney to Lampard to Mourinho. There's no strategy. There's nothing in place. It's very scattergun. And And I think the fact that Machini went against the fans and recruited Benitez in the first place was worrying. I don't think there's relief because I don't think any Evertonian thinks we're out of the potential relegation scrap. We're certainly not too good to go down. As you touched on, his Liverpool links didn't help, but if football fans and football fans, if you're winning games of football, you're happy. We were on the earlier podcast in September last year, and he wasn't our choice, but we were prepared to give him a chance. To give you context of our Premier League form, since that month, September, Everton won one Premier League game, which, you can have. Peter Crouch came out saying that we sacked him because we thought Liverpool fans were laughing at us. And, you have all these pundits who don't pay attention, don't realise how bad it is, and have something to say. The Evertonians are fair people, and they're a fair set of fans, and they were prepared to give him a chance. But, you look at the Premier League table and the form table, if you played for Everton and you're an Everton legend, you're probably getting sacked. Well, you're not probably, you are getting sacked for that form because you've got to be ruthless, otherwise, we'll be playing Championship football. As I say, one league game since September, we won, and that was Norwich at home. Some of his tactical decisions were unbelievable. We had, to give the Villa fans, again, a bit of context, we had Seamus Coleman playing left wing back and centre back in different games, and he's nearly 33-year-old right back. We had Rondon starting games of football over Richarlison. Richarlison's the number 9 for Brazil. Rondon is a pasta striker that's come out of the Chinese league. It's incredible the decisions he was making, and then he's falling out with everybody left, right, and centre. You've got the director of football, the head of our recruitment, Luca Dean, everybody leaving the football club, and we're losing games of football. So, it's an absolute shambles, and all Evertonians, I don't speak for all Evertonians, but I'm confident that I do here. Everybody's glad to see the back of Benitez. But what I would say, and this isn't a defence of Benitez because he needed to go, he wasn't just the problem. The problems are higher up at the club, which again I won't bore the Villa fans with, but they've got to get the next appointment right, otherwise we could well go down. And when you hear Roberto Martinez, you sink in your seat because clearly the people who run the club, they don't really have a clue how to run a football club right now.
No, and I think in terms of the stat I saw, which I think illustrated perfectly what you say, that there's bigger issues at Everton than just Benitez, is that the highest Premier League finish in, I think it's last 5 years, was under Sam Allardyce, which I think, in terms of, that was probably even, in some senses, even more than Benitez, if you take the Liverpool thing out of it, the most anti-Everton appointment you could possibly think of in terms of his style of play, as opposed to historically the school of science way Everton liked to play. Allardyce was a square, probably literally a square peg in a round hole, or a round peg in a square hole, depending which way you're looking at it. So I think there are bigger issues, in terms of that, and you mentioned them. And even a hero, you said, at Everton may not have lasted that run of form, but you do have a hero currently in charge as a caretaker manager, Duncan Ferguson, back taking the reins. He did okay last time he was caretaker, some good results against big teams in the league. Do you think that if he beats a great team like Villa on Saturday, that he's deserves a shot at getting the full-time gig, or is he very much let's have somebody holding the ship whilst we get somebody else in?
I think it's both. For me, I will give him it until the end of the season, and then reevaluate what we want. I touched on there, Baz. Right now, the club is all over the place. They don't know what they want. You've got Mourinho, Graham Potter, Mourinho, Graham Potter, Martinez, Nuno, Rooney, Lampard, you've got all these names, but there's no identity. And I think with Duncan Ferguson, he could hold the ship, but while he's doing that, we could assess to see what he can actually get out of these players. Um, whilst Duncan Ferguson's managing Everton, that could allow Everton and buy Everton time to restructure the club and to work out what do we want. Because before you can have a short list of managers, in my opinion anyway, you need to know how you want your team to play, how you want the football to be at the club. So if you want to be a team that plays up from the back, then your shortlist will have Martinez, Graham Potter. It's never going to have Mourinho or managers of that ilk, and it's that kind of thing that I think Everton are missing as to what they want. So for me, yeah, I think he can hold the ship, but also while he's in the role, it could be that he gets results, and all of a sudden we don't need to look elsewhere. For me, right now, Everton needs stability, and I think Duncan Ferguson allows for that. I mean, he's unproven, of course, and he is inexperienced, but from an Everton point of view, he's been at the club that long. If he can't get it in these circumstances, then I don't know when it'll ever be the right time for him. So there's no universal opinion, united fronted to what the Everton fans want. Every Evertonian will have their own opinion, but for me, and Talking Toffees, Andy and I, we want Duncan Ferguson to have it until at least the end of the season. As you touched on, Baz, when he took over before Ancelotti, his results were very good. I mean, it was only a few games. Man United away, we drew. We beat Chelsea home, and we drew with Arsenal. So, not a whole pile of games, but that's all he was given, and he done well. So, like any football fan, it doesn't matter who you support. You want to see passion and fight from your team, and I think Duncan Ferguson will get that out of the players. So, yeah, it depends on who you speak to, but for Talking Toffees, we want Duncan Ferguson.
No, I mean, if the Everton board continue with their historic going from one side to the other and don't have that stability in terms of Duncan Ferguson, has there been any name that's been linked to you thought they could do a decent job, or has it really been just trying to avoid one landmine from another? In terms of from an outside perspective, it's a collection of managers. Well, in Martinez's case, you've already been to Everton and failed. There's managers who, as you mentioned, style of football just doesn't fit what Everton want to play. And then there's Frank Lampard, who, in terms of, I think if Everton go for Lampard, I think that does sum up perfectly what you've just said in terms of having no long-term strategy in terms of what Everton wants to do at the club. And it was similar when Villa were looking for a new manager. It was more a case of guess who amongst the fans, take away the managers who you don't want, and then you're left kind of with a couple who you can have a further consideration. Is there anybody who you think might be able to step in at Everton, or is it really just a dart in a dartboard and hope?
It's a difficult one because you're not coming into a functional club right now. So any manager has got to deal with the fact that it's a January transfer window and we have no recruitment team in place, and we have an owner that, I mean, in terms of El Ghazi, who we signed on loan, Everton signed him because the owner is mates with El Ghazi's agent. I mean, that's what you're dealing with. So it's difficult. There's not a manager that, I mean, look, every manager is a risk, but there's no manager right now that I have the opinion if they came in, he would do a good job. He could, of course, he could. I mean, Lampard, my take with him is with Derby County, he threw a lot of money at it, and ultimately they never got to the Premier League, and they're suffering as a result of that. And then with Chelsea, it didn't work out for him. So I don't, he might be a good manager in time, but right now there's nothing for me that suggests he will do it at Everton. And he doesn't have that Everton connection. Not that you need to, of course, but he's not someone who will look at and think he will do a good job. Wayne Rooney, the major reservation I have with Rooney, apart from the lack of experience, is he's always one step away from being in front of all the newspapers for doing something he shouldn't. And it's one thing as a player, but when you're a manager, you cannot do that. And I don't trust Rooney off the pitch, to be perfectly honest. But he could, he does get Everton, I suppose, so he could be a good appointment. But yeah, there's no manager who we've been linked with, and you think I'd love him. Obviously, if you're a bigger club and your prospects are looking better, then we all know the obvious names every club would love. The Diego Simeones and Guardiolas of the world. But when you're in Everton's position, you do have a select group of managers you can pick from, and right now, for me, Duncan Ferguson just seemed the safe one. I mean, the other aspect to the worrying times in Everton is the quick, how quick Everton tries to appoint Roberto Martinez. It was all so scattergun a million miles an hour. I think Duncan Ferguson allows the club to just calm down, take a breath, let Ferguson have the next 3 to 5 games, and then see what's out there, and then just get the club in shape. But no, Baz, to answer your question, there is no manager out there who I would identify and think he could do a good job. Ironically, and I did say this to you before we came on, when Everton were looking for a manager in the summer when Ancelotti left, the one manager who would thought if it wasn't him and it wasn't Everton, it would work out, would be someone like Steven Gerrard, because Everton need a hungry young manager with fire in the belly who can galvanise a football club, who's a winner. And, he's a bit of a horror. He's got a nasty streak in him. He can be quite ruthless. I think you saw that yourselves. I saw the Villa player make a mistake, Samson it might have been, and within a minute or two he's hooked. And that's the kind of mentality he's got. Obviously, as an Evertonian, we hate him and the feeling's mutual. But somebody like that, I think, would be ideal. But who that person is, I don't know.
No, it's okay. You can get hold of Gerrard and he'll give you Jamie Carragher's number. So, Bella's gal. But mentioned Duncan Ferguson is going to be in a dugout on Saturday when Villa come to town in the lunchtime kickoff 12:30. How do you see the game going in terms of? I'm going to hazard a guess, slightly more optimistic than you would have been if Benitez was still in charge.
Yeah, that's it, Baz. I mean, it's a difficult one to analyse because we don't know how Ferguson will set up with these players. Last time with Chelsea, when he took over, he went and reverted to a simple 4-4-2. So he might do something similar on Saturday against a very good and organised Aston Villa side. Purely from an emotional point of view, on Saturday, it'll be emotionally charged because we'll have our hero in Duncan Ferguson in the dugout, and then a bit like a pantomime in the other dugout, we'll have the exact opposite. So that in itself will create an atmosphere. How much I don't know with it being a Hartwell kickoff, but I do expect it'll be quite feisty. So I think for the first 10, 20 minutes, I think Everton will try and play at a high tempo and use the crowd's energy. And I think Gerrard will know that. And I think Gerrard will want Villa to keep the ball, keep doing what they do and take the sting out of the game. After that sort of first 15, 20 minutes, when it calms down, I think that's the acid test. And that's what I'm not sure about. I think if Villa get through the first 20 minutes, okay, and then they start knocking it about, I expect Coutinho will start because obviously he came on and scored on his debut. So I think the likes of him will try and get on the ball and dictate. And I think there'll still be a nervousness to Everton, particularly at the back, and I think Villa will want to exploit that. So I think it's really I think it'll come down to how Villa deal with the early part of the game in terms of the emotion. Because I think if Villa do get past that and they do play their own game, then I don't know how Everton will deal with that in terms of the whole run of form we've been on. You can't flick a switch. I appreciate and I think it's true to an extent. When a new manager comes in, it does give everybody a lift, but there's a lot of issues on the pitch with Everton, particularly set pieces, which I think again someone like Gerrard will be working on this week. Ironically, players like Luka Dean and Coutinho. So, look, because of Everton's position and being an Evertonian, I will go for the Everton win. 2-1 I'll go for, but that's not with any confidence. That's just pure hope and desperation, to be frank, at this stage. But it goes without saying with the form Villa are in. I saw the FA Cup game, which, it was a shambles by VAR. I think, any Man United fan will tell you that Villa should have gone through. So Villa are no mugs. They are in, a good bit of form right now, and I think it'll be a tough one. Hopefully, from our point of view, the fact Gerrard comes back against Ferguson, it'll be a bit like a derby, and that might just give Everton the edge, being at home.
And the little matter of quite literally the little matter of Coutinho coming into town. I mean, if he's fit, he'll start. I mean, in terms of, I think it's just getting his match fitness up. In terms of, he hasn't played much over the last year or so. He's been injured. I think there's COVID he had fairly recently. My understanding is correct. So just getting him up to speed, and you mentioned in terms of building an atmosphere. If he's starting, I'm sure the Everton fans will have a few things to say about that. But I mean, from a Villa perspective, if it would have been Benitez, I think this thing's could have got very ugly very quickly for Everton at Goodison. I think in terms of Goodison is similar to Villa Park. If you can keep the home team quiet for the first half hour, there's a little bit of doubt begins to filter amongst the support, and especially if it's a poor start from the home team, it can be a long way back in terms of, funnily enough, it almost went to script on that against when Villa played Man United last week. Great atmosphere at the start, absolutely terrible for the first half an hour. Villa, Man United ahead, we got into it, but the crowd came back into the second half, and that was a big factor in terms of us being able to turn it around. There's Coutinho as well, he helped. But I think it's always a tricky one being that first team in after there's been a managerial change, especially Ferguson having experience of coming in and having to quickly rectify, a situation left behind from a previous manager. I think the mess he's got to deal with now is a lot worse than it was. And yeah, ordinarily I would go for a draw, but I look in terms of Everton and the way they played against Norwich on Saturday, and the team as well. And it, as you mentioned, it takes a lot to turn it round. And I think the fact Everton haven't got a midweek game helps in the fact that there's a week on the training ground. But I agree with you in terms of that first half hour is going to be key. If Villa can navigate what's going to be choppy waters, carry on playing their game, get our playmakers on the ball. I mean, Coutinho's the obvious one, but Buendia he's playing himself into form now, and is amongst a lot of Villa fans, one of the names that should be on the starting 11. I mean, we got McGinn didn't play last week. We expect him to be back in. Watkins, Ings, maybe only one of those will play potentially. That's a lively debate amongst Villa fans in terms of that. But yeah, I think it's going to be a tight game. I think there's going to be a reaction from the Everton fans, from the Everton players as well, just because if the Everton board do take your sensible advice and take their time in finding a replacement, players are going to be having to compete to get in this Ferguson team 3, 4, 5, however many games it is. And so in that sense, I think Villa will win. I think it'll be 2-1. I think it'll be a close game, but I agree with you. If Everton could come out the starting blocks early, front foot forward, then the crowd could really become a factor into it. But I may have predicted a Villa win, but I'll try and leave on like an optimistic note in that still in the FA Cup, as you mentioned, Villa aren't, Everton are, and 1995 in terms of wasn't the greatest season in the league, issues for most of the season in terms of potential relegation.
Yeah.
Hopes of a cup run, or is that kind of too far forward to look at in terms of what's been going on the last week?
Yeah, it's a pipe dream, Baz. Of course, we'd love the FA Cup, but right now, as a blue, if I was offered sort of 13th, 12th, and that's 7th for the season, I'd take it, because the 16th, and there's no sign of life with Everton right now. Within the cup, just about, I think had we played high level opposition, we would have gone out. I don't think whether it's Ferguson or another manager, I don't think they will prioritise the FA Cup in the sense that if you go out the cup this year, of course, it's disappointing given it's been 27 years without a trophy. But the reality is, with Everton are, there's major issues at the top. The club needs restructuring. And I think if we can keep our Premier League status and then go again next season. But you're right, in '95 it wasn't great. The team wasn't anything special. But the one thing that team had, which I think worries Evertonians about this team, is that '95 team had character and fight. There was limited ability, but they called the dogs of war for a reason. They rolled the sleeves up and they fought. I don't really see that in a lot of these players. Obviously, the game's moved on itself anyway, but I don't look at a lot of Everton players and think there's many characters or fighters. And that's why, again, comes back to Duncan Ferguson being both of those things, and hopefully he might get a tune out of some of them. The FA Cup would be great, and we've got what should be a favourable draw at home to Brentford, but right now we can't buy a win, so we'll see what happens. It will be a miracle if Everton won a trophy this season, but I suppose stranger things have happened given what Roberto Martin has done with Wigan. So
no.
You've got to be in it to win it, but right now I would take staying in the Premier League and go again next season, and I think that is damning in itself as to the job Rafa Benitez done. When that's what I'm saying, given when I was last on with you guys, we were talking about potentially Europa League football,
Yep. Well, you could always try and get Amakachi on the phone. So they could come in for the fourth round if you needed inspiration. Though, say in terms of always great to have you on, Pete. Thanks for joining us in the second half of the season. Hope Everton do make the right choice in terms of the next managerial appointment and that they begin to turn things around. I'm obviously biased here at talking to Trinity Towers, but clubs like Villa, Everton, those kind of historic clubs who have been passed by, shall we say, in terms of the mega money. I mean, we've both got owners with money. I don't think we can deny that. But trying to break kind of the Sky Six, as you may call it, in the league. We're both on the same mission in terms of that, and it's from a neutral perspective. And obviously, we are biased. Having Villa and Everton regularly competing for Europe would be, a throwback to a better time of football, I would say. Again, being obviously biased. So I do wish you and Everton fans luck in turning it around. I mean, hopefully it can't be any worse in terms of what it has been. I mean, Saturday aside, I hope you enjoy that might be a bit stretched currently, but that things continue, that things go in the right direction the rest of the season, and good luck in terms of, and hopefully Nathan Patterson turns out to be a good signing, in terms of, I think you beat several clubs to get him, and hopefully that's the start of a bright future. Hopefully just not Saturday. But
fingers crossed. Thanks for having me on again, Baz. Always enjoy it.
Yeah. And hopefully we'll be having a chat next season, both still in the Premier League and both again once more looking optimistic towards those European places. So cheers for coming on, Pete. Much appreciated. And
you're welcome.
And thank you to our Talking Trinity listeners or viewers for tuning in on our YouTube channel at Talk Trinity, Twitter page at Talk Trinity. You can catch us on our audio channels, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Stitcher, some other ones I probably forgot. I think Google perhaps. And, we appreciate all the likes, retweets, subscriptions, engaging in all things Villa. So needless to say, hope everybody enjoys the game on Saturday, and we'll be with you again soon. So cheers for listening, and bye for now.